That's a powerful song. Well, hopefully we're about to get a powerful lesson. Amen. Let's turn over to Matthew 28, verse 18. The title of the lesson this morning is Never Let Go of the Dream. And I believe dreams are something that's very important and it's very common to all mankind. In fact, we know this. We think of a man in recent history, in American history, who was a great dreamer. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. And on August 28th, in 1963, from the steps of the Lincoln Monument in the capital of our nation, Martin Luther stood and delivered one of the most famous speeches of all time.
Yes, he did.
And the speech was entitled, "I Have a Dream."
Yeah.
Only 5 years later, in Memphis, Tennessee, the great dreamer, Martin Luther King Jr., was killed. For simply having a dream of people of different races, backgrounds, and upbringings living together in our great country. In fact, he wasn't the only dreamer in history. Abraham Lincoln dreamed of an America without slavery, and he too was killed. And he never let go of the dream. Gandhi, all the way in India, dreamed of his country free from oppression. And he too was killed. And he never let go of the dream.
Yeah.
And in Matthew 28, verse 18, we get the great dream of God.
Yeah.
Through Jesus, who has just been resurrected from the dead. He tells his followers the great dream. And the Bible reads in Matthew 28, verse 18.
Come on,
First.
Come on, bro.
Take your time, Nate.
Then Jesus came to his followers and he said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." The great dream of Jesus was that all nations, all people in the world, all different races, ethnic groups, all people from all languages would follow him. You see, God has always wanted a people of his own. That was God's dream, was to find a group of people who would just love him and be with him because he loved us first. As Jorge told us in communion, while we were still enemies, he died for us. I mean, it's very clear throughout the scriptures. In Genesis 2, the way God intended man to live was in this paradise in the Garden of Eden, where they would walk with him, talk with him, be with him, commune with him, and everything would be perfect. In Genesis 6, there was a great flood, and God just wanted the people who would love him, and there was Noah and his family of 8, and all of the animals of creation on that ark. In Genesis 12, God promises Abraham, all of your descendants will be my people. He's always wanted a nation, a family, a people to call his own.
Yeah.
After Moses leads the Israelites out of slavery, in Exodus 19, verse 6, God speaks to his people. He says, if you follow me, if you keep my covenant, if you love me, you will be my treasured possession.
Come on, bro.
God looks at all of you today and you're his treasure. And he wants to possess you, to be with you. He says you'll be a nation of priests, set apart from every other nation. You'll be a nation meant to worship God. You will be God's portion. You will be the part of the earth that God wants.
Come on, bro. Come on.
Though all of the earth belongs to him. Guys, the dream of God was always to have the people of his own. And I believe you guys are God's dream. I believe you guys are what God has wanted from the beginning of time. And my brothers, my sisters, let me tell you, the world always hates the dreamers. They always hate it. They always hate the people who take the words of God, take his dream, and take it out to all nations. They don't like it. My brothers, my sisters, we must never let go of the dream.
Come on, Nate. Come on, bro.
My first point is, God gives us dreams. Let's turn over to Genesis 37.
Come on, bro.
We're going to study out a dreamer in the scriptures. We're going to study out a young man And his name is Joseph. And Joseph in the Old Testament was a man who had many dreams.
Come on, bro.
Now we know that dreams come from God. And so, indeed, God gives us the dreams. In Genesis 37, we're going to pick up in verse 3. Come on, bro. It says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because Joseph had been born to Israel in his old age. He made Joseph an ornate or colorful robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, 'Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it.' His brothers said to him, 'Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?' And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said." Now let's break this down. Israel, his name was Jacob, right? But God changed it to Israel, right? And so Israel had 12 sons. And of his sons, one of them was his favorite, was his treasured possession, we can say. And his name was Joseph. And it says he loved Joseph so much, he handcrafted this Versace, Gucci, Hugo Boss, very colorful suit, jacket, blazer. And he gave it to Joseph, and Joseph put it on, and he was like, "Oh, yes, oh, it looks so good, it fits so well." And he's walking around in his suit jacket, and all of the other brothers, Joseph's kind of like the youngest at this point, right? So what is this little runt of the litter? Why does he get the jacket from dad? Right? So they're like, "You suck, we don't like you." It says they couldn't even say a kind word to him. He's just wearing the jacket that daddy gave him. Then it says Joseph had a dream. Now in that dream, there were sheaves of grain. So have you guys seen like wheat or grain growing in a field? Right? Well, you'd go and you'd cut the grain and you'd tie it with a rope, and there'd be a bundle or a sheaf of grain. And he said, there was my sheaf of grain was in the field with all your sheaves of grain, and mine rose up. And all of your sheaves of grain, 11 other sheaves of grain, bowed down to my sheaf that rose up.
Wow.
By the way, have you guys seen my jacket? Right? Like, this is right. And it says his brothers hated him all the more. I kind of asked myself, why was he Israel's favorite? Right? Well, it says because he was born at a young, Israel was old, and then Joseph was the youngest, right? And so that's part of it. I believe, though, as well, that he loved Joseph because Israel, or Jacob, was a dreamer too. Right? Earlier in Genesis, he has a great dream where he sees a ladder connecting heaven and earth and angels coming down and going up on it, and he wakes up from the dream and he goes, "Surely, this is the gates of heaven." Joseph's dad, Jacob, Israel, was a dreamer too. And his son Joseph was a dreamer. Now the thing is, Joseph obviously had no tact. He had no sensitivity to people's emotions. He didn't really think things through before he spoke, right? So he just walked up and was like, "Hey, all you guys are gonna bow down to me. All right, cool, awesome. Hey, have you seen my jacket, right?" And so obviously, the response from the brothers is like, "Dude, you're a little punk." And so one day, right? His brothers are taking care of the sheep, but they're like miles away from home. I believe they're in Goshen, but they're out there and they're watching the sheep. And so Israel says, "Hey, go find your brothers and tell them to come in. It's supper time. Go grab your brothers." So Joseph, skipping through the field, tra-la-la-la-la, I'm going to go get my brothers. It's going to be a great day. He gets there and he's like, "Hey guys, well, they see Joseph skipping through the field, right? Coming to them and they're like, "Oh, here comes that little punk. Look at his jacket. Look at his jacket." So they happen to be near this cistern or well, a really deep pit, right? And they happen to be next to him. They do. Why don't we just beat this guy up and throw him in the pit, and we'll leave him there? We'll go back and we'll tell Dad that Joseph was killed. So they go, they beat him, they put him in the pit, and Joseph's stuck there. It says that they sat there eating. What kind of person do you have to be That you put your own flesh and blood, your own sibling in a pit. I put you, hey guys, let me out. Hey, is this a joke? Hey, all right, hey, that's a good one. Ashton? Ashton, am I being punked? Ashton? Right? Like, all right, guys, all right, hey, Reuben, put the rope down. Simeon? Levi? Hey, guys, it's getting kind of dark. Guys? And as he's in the pit. Dude, what are his brothers doing? They're eating. They're having, ours is he's hungry too, and they're just eating. They just leave little brother in the pit. They hated the Jews. They hated him. They were planning to kill him. And one of the brothers is like, hey, we can't really kill him. We know it's Dad's favorite, and we love Dad. We all love Dad. So all of a sudden, these slave traders come by, Midianites, and they're headed to Egypt to sell spices and myrrh and to sell slaves. Like, hey, instead of killing Joseph, why don't we just give him to the Midianites, and whatever happens, kind of like our hands are clean. We didn't kill him, but we got rid of him, It's kind of, they feel a little better about themselves there, right? And so they sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver, and cheaper than the price of a slave, right? Which I believe is 30. And so they send Joseph out, and he goes to Egypt, right? So we got to kind of ask the question now. Why do bad things happen to good people?
That's a good question.
Right? Like, what did Joseph do? Hey, man, he came off a little arrogant there. But, man, thrown in the pit and, sent off into slavery. Joseph's not necessarily a bad guy. He needs to work on his social skills, but why would such a bad thing happen to a good person? I mean, isn't there a God? Wouldn't God, intervene, right? Isn't God like Superman? Wouldn't he, come and help?
Yeah.
Right? Let's look over at 1 Peter chapter 1.
Come on, bro.
And we're going to start to answer this question. And in 1 Peter chapter 1, we're going to begin to understand one of the most fundamental teachings of the Bible. Why would bad things happen to good old coat-wearing Joseph? In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6, Peter is talking about suffering. So he says, in all of this, you greatly rejoice, though now, for a little while, you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These, the grief and the trials, have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes, even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Right? So what Peter is saying is, man, we might be going through hardship in our life, through suffering, through trials. Maybe your financial aid didn't come through. Maybe you and your spouse are fighting a lot lately. It seems like it's never going to end. Maybe your finances are suffering and undergoing trials. Maybe your health, whatever it is. Peter tells us to rejoice. It's a crazy concept. Be happy when you're suffering and undergoing trials. Because it's a test of your faith to see it's genuine.
Yeah.
Then he goes on and says it's like gold, even though the faith is more precious than gold, right? So I think about the concept. This is why Peter uses gold. So I think, how many of you guys have heard of fool's gold?
Oh, yeah.
It looks just like gold, shines just like gold, feels like gold, but when you start to put it under pressure, it crumbles. It's very brittle, right? Real gold is soft and malleable, kind of like Play-Doh, right? Fake fool's gold crumbles like a cookie. It's very crumbly, right? And so we have to figure out the difference between real gold and fake gold. So real gold comes from the earth. It's an ore. And when you pull out this nugget of gold from the ground, it's got a lot of impurities, a lot of other elements and chemicals that make the gold not shiny. It devalues or makes the gold not worth a lot. So a man who pulls out gold from the ground, he has to refine the gold, test the gold so it's in its purest, most valuable form.
Yeah.
So he puts it into the fire. It melts down into a golden liquid. He pours it out into like a big pot. And because of the heat, all of the impure chemicals, all of the things that make the gold dirty, all of the sin rises to the top. It sits like a layer of foam on top of the gold. Then he takes a sifter kind of like a, sifting like a little net. And he runs it on the top of the gold and pulls out all of the gunk and what's left in the pot. All the gold, what you want. But they usually do this process 3, 4, 5 times in the fire, out of the fire, cool the gold, in the fire, out of the fire, sift, cool the gold, rinse and repeat. And at the end of it, you get this, we have 10 carat, 12 carat. You want this 24 carat, pure, solid nuggets of gold.
Come on, bro. Yeah.
You know what it takes? Testing, fire, melting down, removing the impurities on top.
Yeah.
That, Peter says, that's what he talks about, gold refined by fire. That is when your faith is tested.
Yeah.
That is when you feel like, why would God do this to me? Yeah, that's your faith being tested.
Yeah.
Will you still rejoice and be happy that at the end of this life, no matter what happens, good or bad, if I hold on to my faith, I will be with God?
Come on, bro.
And we will all have to answer that question. Not by what we say, but by how we live our life.
Come on, Dave.
Let's pick up in Genesis 39. Let's see what happens to young Joseph. In Genesis 39, we'll start in verse 5. So Joseph arrives in Egypt and he gets bought as a slave to an Egyptian man named Potiphar. Right? And so Potiphar was the head captain of all of the guard in the palace. So like the head of the Secret Service for the President of the United States. Right? Big deal. Good position. And so Joseph does really well as a servant. He works hard, and it says the Lord was with Joseph. Potiphar recognizes it, and so he puts Joseph in charge of all of the orders of his house, of his budget, of the chores, of all of the other slaves. I mean, Joseph is just really cranky, right? He didn't get discouraged. He didn't get down. He didn't give up. He didn't quit. He just worked like a man of God wherever he was. Let's pick up in Genesis 39, verse 5. From that time, Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household and of all that he owned. And the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. He only needed a chef, because Joseph took care of everything else. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph. Hey. Oh, hey, Joseph. Hey, Jojo.
He got it from you.
Come to bed with me, she says. But he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me, except for you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day after day, he refused to go to bed with her, or even be with her. So here's a young man. Young men aren't known for turning down beautiful women. But here's a young man of God who has been sold into slavery. Everything bad has happened to him. And you know what? He just doesn't get down. He works really hard as a slave in this guy Potiphar's house. And God lifts him up and blesses him in a great way.
Yeah.
He blesses the joy through suffering. But then, this seductive woman, tries hey, sleep with me every single day. I love Joseph's heart. He says, how could I sin against my master? He's done nothing but take care of me. Then he says, how could I sin against God? You see, to mistreat other people is to sin against God.
Yeah.
It affects the vertical relationship is affected by the lateral, horizontal relationship.
Yeah.
And Joseph understood this.
Yeah.
Joseph understood this. So what happens is, one day he's cleaning in her room, she's in there, no one else is around, and she tries to force him into bed. And he gets out of it and runs, but she pulls off his robe. And so he's running naked around the house. And so she cries, ah! And then, all the servants come. Potiphar comes home. And he's like, what happened? And she, the wife is like, Joseph tried to rape me. He tried to force himself on me. Joseph's like, dude, no, I didn't. I wasn't me.
Yeah.
And she's holding his robe, his clothes. Right? Guess what happens? He's a Hebrew slave. This is a well-respected government official. And his wife is accusing the slave. Who's going to win? No one was around. His word versus her word. Who's going to win?
Right.
Of course, the wife. Joseph gets thrown into prison. You know whose prison it is? Potiphar's prison. He runs the whole guard of the palace. So he goes from being on top to the lowest of the low.
Yeah.
For doing what? Being a righteous man.
Yeah.
Dude, he did nothing wrong. He's a great guy. He's handsome. He's well built. He works hard. He treats others well. And you know what he gets for it? Prison.
Yeah.
Why? Why do bad things happen to good people?
Come on.
Let's pick up in Romans chapter 5.
So,
Romans chapter 5.
Come on, Nate.
Come on, bro. This is awesome.
great.
In Romans chapter 5, verse 3, the Bible reads, not only so, but we get glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. Here we have the key of the scriptures. That the reason why we go through sufferings and hardship is actually for glory. God's glory. That people who don't know the Bible, who don't know God, will look at our lives and be like, wow, you're really going through a hard time. How are you still so happy? Why are you still going to church? Why are you still worshiping God? Dude, God loved me, man. He poured out his love into my heart.
Yeah.
You can't take away my joy. You guys understand your joy can't be taken?
Yeah.
But you can give your joy away.
Yep.
Essentially to Satan, who's creating all these hard circumstances. Guys, we learn what suffering does. Suffering produces perseverance. So when we're going through a hard time, perseverance means we're able to last longer. Another word for perseverance is endurance. Think of a marathon. You're running a marathon. I know some of you guys have ran a marathon. Like mile 2, you're like, you're good. Mile 3, you're like picking up the pace. But like mile 13, you're just like, oh my gosh. It's only halfway, huh? Right? But what do you need to finish the race? You need endurance, perseverance. And do you start on day 1 being able to run 26 miles? No, you have to train and go through it time and time again. And what builds up after the blisters on your feet? Right? What builds up after the sore leg muscles from running? You get character. You learn not to quit. Right? Suffering produces perseverance, endurance. That gives us character. That we become men and women who aren't easily rattled, who aren't easily shaken, men and women of faith, men and women who we're on time, we're men and women of our word. Our self-denial level goes up from level 5 to level 10. Right? We learn how to push through hard situations and smile and be loving. When it seems like everything is falling apart. And then once we have character, it gives us hope. What's the great hope? That this party that we're having here Sunday morning, we get to have in heaven for forever. That all of the physical pains and maladies in our body that we either have now or as we get older will have, doesn't matter. It says that as Christ was raised to a new life with a new body, the dead will rise and we will have a new body. That God truly wants to just make us new again so that we can be with him in heaven.
Wow.
That's our hope. Heaven. In the presence of God, worshiping him in new bodies, free from all of the sin of this world.
Come on, bro.
It's hope. But some of us never get to hope. Because we didn't want the character. Why didn't we want the character? Well, because that means I have to persevere.
Yeah.
Well, what do I have to persevere in? Suffering is too hard. In Job 36:21, it says, beware of turning to evil, which you prefer to your suffering. So when it gets hard and we can't deal with it, we turn to evil. We turn to pleasure, we turn to drugs, we turn to different things. Because those things make us feel good for a moment. In the middle of my suffering, can I just get one break? Can I get one thing to go right, please? Like a promotion, something? So, and if we're not getting that good in the middle of the hardship, one good thing, then you know what? I'll make the good thing myself. Let me go sleep with someone. Let me go do drugs. Let me go whatever it is. So if we don't endure the suffering, we don't get the character, and we lose our hope. I think of Captain America.
Oh, yeah.
Gosh! That guy has endurance for days! For days! How many of you guys saw Avengers Endgame? I love it. He's out there, and Thanos is the bad guy, shows up with his whole army. Talking about hundreds of thousands of bad guys, evil, ugly, alien monsters, bent on destroying the world. And Thanos, he kicks Thor's butt, he kicks Iron Man's butt, and the only guy left is Captain America. So he goes to fight Thanos, boom! He gets punched in the face. Thanos takes a sword, and Captain America is known for his like vibranium shield that's like indestructible, right? And guess what? The shield breaks, and Captain America is beaten, bloody, bruised. All of his other friends knocked out, and he gets up. He like stumbles forward. He like looks up, and there's Thanos and 100,000 bad guys. And he looks around, and he's the only one standing. He takes a deep breath, and he tightens the shield. It's half broken shield. I'll flat kill all of you right now. You guys know the scene, right? Like, you guys know that is character.
Yeah.
That is hope.
Come on, man.
That is a man who has suffered and endured. And he will stand facing all of the armies of evil. And he'll fight.
Come on, bro.
And I believe all of us got to get there. I believe some of us are there. I believe we can take it to the next level. We can go past that because that's just a movie.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Guys, we'll be men and women with character and hope. That's what God wants for us.
Come on, man.
My second point, and my last point. The humble live out the dream.
Come on.
Let's go back to Genesis. We're going to check in with our boy Jojo. And we're going to see how he's doing in prison.
So busy.
Genesis 39.
Come on, Nate.
Let's pick up in Genesis 39 in verse 20.
Come on, bro.
Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed Joseph kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all of those held in the prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Right? And so we see that even in prison, even at the most lowest, shameful, most people look at like prisoners as like, ugh, they're the scum of society. Most people say that. I'm not saying prisoners are, but you know, it's kind of the point of view. That's where the criminals go, you know?
Yeah.
Even then, Joseph doesn't get angry. He doesn't get bitter. He doesn't question God. He's none of his active. He goes, he does what he's told to do, he gets noticed, and guess what? God raises him up. Very soon, he's second in command to what? Everyone in the prison. He running the show. Nowhere in the scriptures does Joseph ever freak out. You see, God was training Joseph for something bigger. What was a little dream years and years and years ago in the field with his brothers, the dream had to be realized. The dream had to come to life. The only way that happens is through training, through testing, through trials. Right? He goes into Potiphar's house, rises to the top. Boom, shot down to the bottom, lowest of the prison, rises to the top. God is just putting Joseph through it. But Joseph is so humble. And what is he holding on to? The dream. He knows God is going to let me live out that dream. God knows what's best for me. It might not be going the way I want the dream to be lived out.
Right.
But man, I know God is with me. And it's just training Joseph for something bigger.
Yeah.
One day, two men who really pissed off Pharaoh, the king, they get thrown into prison. Pharaoh's baker and Pharaoh's cupbearer. Well, I always like to think, how did they get into prison? Oh, maybe the baker baked a pastry that was disgusting. The cupbearer went to taste it and was like, oh, it's good, Pharaoh. Gave it to Pharaoh. Pharaoh bite it. He was like, oh, it's gross. You're both going to prison. It doesn't say that, but that's how I like to picture it in my head. Right? So, I don't know how you ruin a pastry, but the baker figured it out. And so, the baker and the cupbearer are put into prison. They both have a dream. They hear that Joseph is a man of dreams. And so Joseph interprets the dream. And basically it's, I believe the baker is going to get restored to his position as the baker, and the cupbearer will be killed. And so 3 days later it happens. The baker goes, right, back to Pharaoh, and the cupbearer is killed. And before the baker leaves to go back to his position, Joseph tells the baker, hey, remember me, man. Remember what I did for you. Years go by. And Joseph is like, hey, I doesn't say it, but it's like, you don't remember. I'm still stuck here in prison. Right? One day, years later, Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh has a dream and he has no idea what it means. It's kind of a weird dream. And so he asks who can interpret the dream? Who can interpret the dream? And none of his wise men could. And then the baker's like, as he's giving him like a croissant, you know, like, oh, here's your croissant, here's your muffin. Oh, Joseph! Dude, there's a guy from prison who can actually interpret dreams. So, you know, Joseph is brought out of prison. They wash him up. He had like a 5 o'clock shadow, you know, so they shave him up, you know, put him in a nice jacket, they give him some perfume, you know. And he goes before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh tells him the dream. And basically, Joseph interprets the dream, and this is what the dream was. That the next 7 years were going to be years of plenty. Plenty of money, plenty of food to go around for the whole country of Egypt. But then after that, there was going to be 7 more years of famine, a lack of food, a lack of plenty. People will starve and die. And so Pharaoh's like, dang, you're totally right. How do we fix it? Because that's crazy. You just told me what's going to happen to my country for the next 14 years. You know what, Joseph? You seem like a very smart guy. You take care of it. I'll put you second in command of all of Egypt, the most powerful country of that time. There will be no one more powerful than you, Joseph. Dang. Except for me. So fix it. And Joseph does. He creates a great plan that during the 7 years of plenty, instead of indulging, right, they save up tons of food, right? So then when the 7 years of famine come, everyone would be fine. So Joseph, you know, he has a team, an administration team, and they make it happen. Now the rest of the world was affected by this great 7 years of famine as well. And so let's pick up in Genesis 45. Verse 4. So what happens is, because of the rest of the world, it has no food, right? No rain. It can't grow their crops. Miles and miles away, Joseph's family. Remember the dudes who sold him into slavery at first? Yeah. Joseph's dad, right? They're all starving to death. Joseph's dad thinks Joseph is dead, right? The brothers took his robe after they sold him into slavery, dipped it in animal blood, and they gave it to Israel, to Jacob. So for years and years, you know, Joseph has been dead to them. And so they hear that Egypt has extra grain and that they're selling the grain. And so they're like, man, we got to go buy some grain or we're all going to starve and die. So Joseph's brothers get sent by dad, and they go all the way to Egypt and they knock on Joseph's front door. They open the door. They're like, hey, yo, we need some grain. We brought some money, some gifts. Like, yo, please, can we work something out? And Joseph sees them and he's like, oh my gosh, these are my brothers. Yeah. These are the guys, like the reason why I was in prison, the reason why I was in Potiphar's house, the reason why I was away from my dad, my family, the reason why my life has been the way it is. It's because these dudes right here knocking on my front door. Now, they need me. Let's pick up Genesis 45,
Come on, bro.
verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here. Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and no reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God."
Come on.
Joseph looks back at his life. He looks back at all of the ups, all of the downs, all of the accusations, all of the lies, all of the truth. He looks at all of it. And he's like, it wasn't even you guys that put me in slavery. It wasn't even you guys that hurt me. It wasn't even you guys that lied to my dad. God had a plan to save Egypt and to save Israel, which is the Gentiles and the Jews, which represents the whole world. God had a plan to deliver everyone. Joseph looked back at his life and he saw one thing: the hand of God.
Yeah.
You see, Joseph really lived out the scripture that he was trusted with little, that he would be faithful with a lot. He was put in charge of Potiphar's house, put in charge of the prison as a test to see what he would do when he would be put in charge of Egypt. Would he let the high position get to his head, or would he stay humble and forgive the men, his own family, who hated him for being a dreamer?
Yeah.
Of course, because of the testing, he was a humble man. And he forgave them and loved them, and he gave them food. He saved his family. He saved the nations. Because he was a humble man who now wasn't just dreaming about the brothers bowing down to him. Now he was living it out.
Yeah.
The dream was realized. The dream was lived out. Because he was humble. You see, the Bible again talks about this. Let's look at Hebrews 12.
Come on, bro. Take it side, bro.
Come on, Nate.
It's awesome.
Straight fire, bro.
Let's look at Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews 12, verse 7. It says, "Endure hardship as discipline." Endure hardship. What kind of hardship? All of it.
Right.
Endure perseverance. Endure the hardship. As what? Discipline. God is treating you as his children. So guess what? If you came in here suffering and some trials and stuff, guess what? You're a child of God. Awesome. Wonderful. You're a son or daughter of God.
Come on.
For what children are not disciplined by their father?
That's true.
If you didn't have a father, mother, grandfather, legal guardian, whatever, right? And we even understand what happens to those who aren't disciplined. Right? You ever seen someone and then you learn about them and you're like, oh, you make so much sense.
Right.
You never got spanked, you never got disciplined as a kid. You make so much sense. I get it now. Right? So then here is God. God treats us like a good father. He disciplines us for our own good. If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our earthly fathers disciplined us for a little while, as they thought best, but God disciplines us because he hates us, because he's angry, because he doesn't like us, because he's mean. No. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. Maybe you guys can relate to verse 11. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Amen. There it is. Amen.
Right.
If you didn't get anything, that is for sure true. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful.
Yeah.
Later on, however, it produces a harvest like all of the grain that Joseph saved. It produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it.
Wow.
So here's the thing, we can go through all the suffering and all the hardships and not be trained by it.
Yeah.
It says it's for those who have been trained by it. When you go through your hardships and you learn the lessons God's trying to teach you, it says you will be righteous, you will have done everything right, and you will have peace.
Yeah.
If you lack peace in your life, it's probably because you're not learning the lessons that God is trying to teach you through the hardship.
Appreciate it, bro.
How many times did Joseph have to go through a hardship? Sold into slavery, accused of rape, thrown in prison. Like, then facing his brothers face to face. Oh my God. Ah. But he learned the lessons, and he became a righteous man, full of peace. So peaceful that he could forgive the men who, from maybe some of our point of view, might have ruined his life. Guys, even if you just read in verse 15, if you just jump down a couple verses, it says, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Some of us, when hardship gets into our life, we get bitter. Bitter at God. And then we fall short and we miss His grace.
Yeah.
We won't make it to heaven. Why? Because we got bitter. We saw no reason, no point, no purpose to the pain. We move to the why me. Because we have an American, Western point of view on suffering.
Yeah.
Right? That if anything hurts or makes me feel bad, it's bad.
Yeah.
But no, we should humble out. God, what are you teaching me through this? Because I want to be a righteous man. I want peace. I want to be trained by your discipline.
Yeah, bro.
You're a good father.
That's true.
You see, we can't get bitter at God or at people.
Yeah.
Because we have to see suffering and pain through the Bible's point of view.
Yeah.
Guys, God took Joseph from dreamer to slave to servant to prisoner to prince.
Yeah.
And I believe God wants to take all of us from dreamers to servants to prisoners and deliver us when we become prince and princesses in the kingdom of God. Do you believe it? Joseph had no Bible. Joseph had no Holy Spirit. Joseph had no kingdom. But he never let go of the dream God gave him. I'm going to close out with this scripture. Come on, it's a scripture for us. Romans chapter 8.
Come on.
Romans chapter. And I believe that this is a scripture we have to believe. This is a scripture we have to write onto the tablets of our heart for the rest of our walk as Christians until we make it to heaven. Amen. This is something we have to have a deep conviction on. In Romans 8, verse 28. And we know, do you know, brothers and sisters? And we know that in all things, everything, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. That's all of us. Those He predestined, He called. Those He called, He justified. Those He justified, He glorified. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Amen. In all things, God works for the good of those who love Him. My brothers and sisters, if we believe this, if we live a life like this, I believe we will never let go of the dream, and the dream of an evangelized Sacramento, and the dream of an evangelized world will come true. To God be all the glory.
Hey.